Welcome to this special dialogue on India-US relations brought to you by the Center for Public Policy Research, CPPR, a think tank dedicated to in-depth evidence-based research on various public policy matters. I'm Anusri, Associate Research at CPPR. Today we have a distinguished guest, Mr. Ranjan Mathai, IFS, the former Foreign Secretary of India, who will be sharing his insights on the strategic partnership between India and the United States in light of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first of its kind state visit to the US and the prospects of enhancing cooperation in various domains. So we have the state visit of PM Modi to the US, which commenced on June 23rd at the invitation of the US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. And he also led some yoga celebrations at the UN headquarters on Wednesday, which created a Guinness World Record for the participation of the people of most nationalities, which showcased India's soft power prowess along with our other trade relations and other diplomatic relations. And today, on 22nd June, PM Modi will receive a ceremonial welcome at the White House and then meet President Biden to continue their high-level dialogue, which might be shaping the new phase of India-US relations. So, and he will be also addressing a joint sitting at the US Congress for the second time. So I think we are at a very crucial juncture of India-US relations, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us today at this historic moment. So let's get started with our discussion. So the first visit, the state visit of Prime Minister Modi, generating a lot of excitement and a lot of expectations. So, sir, can you elaborate on the strategic convergences and the mutual interest between India and the US that are paving the path for the next phase of partnership?
Well, first of all, thank you. And let me say I'm very happy to be able to join this dialogue and on a very, very important question. You're right. The visit has generated not just a great deal of excitement, but almost what people in the media would call hype. While broadly, the excitement is justified, normally, analysts and commentators wait for the actual outcomes before they say the excitement is justified or the hype was justified. But presently, the visit has just started. But even so far, it has gone well. There's been a private dinner between the leaders at which only their national security advisors were present. And things seem to have moved rather well. I'm leaving out the yoga part. I'm concentrating on the visit to the US. The preparatory work which was done for this meeting was very, very intensive. And there's a lot of information which came out, which is a little unusual, but it did show the elements of strategic and economic convergence, which you correctly mentioned. Now, I think on the economic front, more than on the strategic, we have seen this convergence. But it's interesting that the areas of economic convergence or the areas of economic cooperation chosen are such that they are precisely those which will help build up strategic ties. And I'll explain that. The first is advanced technology for defense manufacturing. There's advanced computing. There are space applications. There's green technology, the future of energy, perhaps even critical materials for that transition. So all in all, I think it is definitely both strategic and economic convergence. The US strategy of building on this convergence with India goes back a long time, at least till from the beginning of this century. But in 2005 to 2008, when the civil nuclear agreement was signed, the logic was the same, that a strong and rising India is in the interests of the US, which seeks a better balance in Asia, and now on a more global level, a better balance among the powers that be. The thrust, as I said, is on bilateral economic relations, and one of the key elements they have talked about is increasing trade from 175 billion or 180 billion to 500 billion by the end of this decade. Now, the interesting thing is that because of US domestic politics, the United States is not following the strategy it has followed earlier of providing market access along with its investments. you will recall that it is precisely access to the American market that first helped the Europeans, then the Japanese, and after the Cold War, the Chinese, to suddenly develop their industries and become world-class traders. So it is the convergence which is driven by technology, by supply chains, by high technology partnership, including of those of young people, startups, and linked to the defense industry and energy. So these are the areas on which I think they are looking for the most strategic convergence. It is therefore, I would say, driven more by what you could call a geo-economic strategy rather than a pure geopolitical strategy, though politics is definitely part of it. The basic reasoning is that unlike during the Cold War, where the challenge for the United States in its competition with the USSR was primarily military, political, perhaps ideological. With the China, the kind of growing competition it has is as much economic as political or ideological. So I think in this scenario, India is seen as a viable partner. And from India's point of view, this works well. We need US capital, we need US technology, and we need US partnership for driving what we call the transformation of India into a modern, developed country and a power to reckon with on the world stage. It also suits us to define this partnership in geo-economic terms at this stage, precisely because we don't want to generate unnecessary tensions with the Chinese, who we face on our border, or to dilute our existing partnerships of great value with Russia. So I think that said, the underlying reality is that the convergence in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond is ultimately strategic, and it is going to build a very strong relationship between both of our countries, and for India, that works very well.
That's really interesting. So I think over the last 2 decades, both sides, Washington and New Delhi, have been diligently working to establish this relation that we see today. So although, like you have mentioned, there are certain differences, there are a lot of we have been able to establish certain foundational enabling agreements, high-level dialogue mechanisms, regular military exercises, defense trade, and cooperation in industry, technology, innovation, and all this. So I think now is the opportune moment to progress into the next stage of implementing and putting these efforts into action. So all these new initiatives offer a lot of advantages, especially in mutual investment, trade, and all these things that we have to work on and further progress in. At the same time, addressing the certain geopolitical mutual concern as well. So I think this visit has a lot of significance, as it has been 14 years since the last state visit by the Indian Prime Minister to the US, which again marked the beginning of a new phase in the bilateral relationship, as you have mentioned, the 2008 nuclear deal and everything. So, but the global geopolitical environment has changed significantly since then. So how do you think now the changed geopolitical situation necessitate a closer partnership between India and the US?
You're quite right. It is both, as you said, a lot of work has been done, which we have now reached the stage of implementation. And what is driving it is the new geopolitical reality which we live in, which we face. You might remember that after the 2009 visit, I think it was a year after that or there, President Obama said that the India-US relationship would be the defining relationship of the 21st century. It has taken some time, but I think it is proving correct today. We are both democracies, and India is now emerging as a global player, which is capable of being a global power, a global pole of influence and in the world in terms of its capabilities. And these capabilities can be political, economic, strategic, all of which will help in creating a better balance of power globally. India's economy, you would remember, is 3 times the size of what it was in 2009, almost 3 times. So that is one reality we need to contend with. The geopolitical environment, you said, has changed, and you're quite right. I would say till around 2015, the United States was still giving the greatest emphasis to its relationship with China and how to manage it. And the EU, I remember talking to the French a decade earlier, they were all very worried that the US and China is going to form something like a G2. So all that has changed now. Since around 2015, it has been clear that the US-China relationship is driven by strategic competition. And the US is not so dominant in every part of the world as it used to be in 2009. It's had a major economic crisis, it's had a lot of domestic issues and so on. So the US has chosen a strategy of competition with Russia, and it is now mired in this long war. The Russians are mired in a long war in Europe, and that has changed the balance between Russia and China. The EU and Japan are still struggling to cope with the fallout of many issues after the great economic crisis, and they have not really been able to redevelop the kind of momentum of rapid growth and technological change. So in comparative terms, by itself, this rapidly growing India, today the fastest growing large economy in the world, is now a much bigger player on the global stage than it was in 2009. And India has demonstrated again and again a capacity for strategic autonomy and a capacity for pursuing its national goals without change. I'll give you an example. We have not gone along with the Belt and Road Initiative, even when there was not only pressure from China, but pressure from a lot of our friends. And we have seen this. And I think we have maintained our relationship with Russia despite all the issues which the West has tried to make for us. And it has come to the point where now I think they have accepted that India's relationships with Russia, with Iran, and so on are independent, and they are rooted in Indian interests, and therefore they will continue. And that if you want a relationship with India, this has to be factored in. The other big geopolitical change, the US is out of Afghanistan, and therefore it has become far more transactional in its relationship with Pakistan. This dehyphenation, which started in 2009, is no longer even relevant. We are not on the same page. So, and beyond India-Pakistan relations, there's been this huge churn in West Asia, the Saudi-Iran deal and so on. And within this context, there has been a convergence with India and US in that part of the world also, not just in the Indo-Pacific. The I2U2, which we have talked about, India, US, Israel, UAE. So these are all driving the new geopolitics, which makes our relationship today very central to global politics.
Thank you, sir. So as you have rightly said, despite the growing partnership, there's a lot of differences that's persisting in this relationship, particularly regarding India's approach to the war in Ukraine and its relationship with Russia, which is even in terms of defense, we have 6-decade-long relationship with Russia. So could you shed light on how these differences may impact the partnership, especially in balancing the common interest of decoupling the Chinese presence, influence in the region, and by strengthening the US spoken-led system, at the same time maintaining Indian strategic autonomy?
Quite right. I think there are these differences and they are not going to go away. So before I explain that, let me just give a kind of preamble to these kind of differences. The United States is still the single most global power with real global reach and real global interests in every part of the world. Its priorities, because of the deglobalization movement, have become largely twofold. One is the domestic rebuilding, and it wants to rebuild its industrial base and economic and technological advantages which it had over the rest of the world. You might remember that even Jake Sullivan and others who have come to India have talked about the new US foreign policy as being a foreign policy for the middle class. Now, what does that mean? That means a lot of focus on domestic priorities, domestic interests, domestic jobs, domestic prosperity, and so on. So that is one fact. So whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and so on, you can see this. There's a determination to pull inwards. At the same time, they are cognizant of the fact that their security, their prosperity, their global status is linked to their ability to maintain an external presence and their external dominance. And it sees China, as I said, as a great strategic competitor, if not actually a threat. And unlike the Cold War, its competition, as I said, is both political, military, and economic. And therefore, the geo-economic strategy is what is driving it. And therefore, when it builds partnerships to tackle China, it takes into calculation that you have to build on convergences. You cannot do away with differences. And that is why they call this the long game, the long game. Build on convergences, don't emphasize differences, try and manage those differences, and hope that these convergences, and this has happened many times in world history, these convergences ultimately lead to reduction of difference. So, for example, the United States has not applied what is called CATSA, their sanctions regime on purchases of defense equipment, particularly the radars from Russia. And it has lived with our purchases of oil. And it has also managed to live up to a degree with our relationship with Iran, which is another difference which it has. The aim, as I said, is to build these convergences. Now, India, for its part, realizes that these differences could be difficult. And that on our side also, the advantage is to focus on convergence and see that whether it can build up to reduction of the salience, as you would call it, of these differences. Secondly, the growing size of India and its market is one factor which the Americans will keep in mind, whether we have differences or not. If you have a country which is suddenly going to buy 500 Boeing aircraft, as Air India is doing, you've got to take that country seriously. A third factor is the diaspora. Today, it's roughly 4 million Indians living there, very politically active. So they are a force for, I think, building a certain amount of balance and ballast to the relationship, even when you have differences, and there are going to be differences. Now, the US is not actually decoupling, but they call it de-risking. And basically, what that is working on alternative supply chains, and there is therefore an opportunity for investment in India, which fits in with our strategy of transformation to build our industry, to increase our trade, and to emerge as an independent pole in global affairs. So we will have to live with those differences, but build on the convergences.
That's very true, sir. I think India is emerged, I think not emerging, I think we have emerged as a power that USA cannot ignore it. So there have been like a lot of questions raised about the motivation behind enhanced India-US defense, industrial and technological cooperation, especially in the field of critical and emerging technology. So how does this initiatives, like, in the ICET domain, differ from previous endeavors like the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, the DTTI one? So because there was a lot of, apprehensions regarding that initiative. So, and what challenges need to be addressed to ensure the success of sensitive technology cooperation?
Well, I think defense and critical technologies partnership is turning out to be the most important part of this present visit and the present level of engagement. And it's in fact not so much called defense technology, it's called ICET, critical and emerging technologies, as well as defense industry, as exemplified by the GE 414 engine deal. Now, and mind you, the GE 414 engine, we have been promised a high degree of transfer of technology. I'll go back to what we call the DTTI. It started in 2012 when I was actually involved with the process. It was, as I said, the beginning of what you might call a long game. On our side, defense industry and bureaucracy was not quite ready and able to manage what was on offer from the US. And on the US side, their bureaucracy and establishment worked in ways which made it more difficult for our industries to fit it in. I will explain that. We have far more cohesion within our government today, and we have started building a very strong private sector defense industry, including startups in many critical fields. So we have an industrial base which isn't just government. So there is a greater scope for collaborations between industries. Now, on the US side, as I said, the bureaucracy moves very slowly and they're highly legalistic. So it was like a chicken and egg question when we had the DTTI. Only allies get certain high-tech access, certain high-tech partnerships. But only high-tech partnerships can make you an ally. So which comes first? So that was the kind of chicken and egg question which we used to deal with. I think we have both got past this. The United States has been able to move in a kind of step-by-step approach, even as we changed our policies after 2012. And in 2015, India was declared a major defense partner. In 2018, we were put on to tier 1 of what is called the Strategic Trade Authorization. And you had all the foundational agreements for military-to-military cooperation. So I think this has helped build up a lot of confidence among the two countries, as well as their bureaucracies. And it's important, bureaucracies move by law, by regulation, and so on, not by just ideas. It's very important that the Quad was also developing as part of this. And I think one very significant event that took place when the first Quad summit was held in Japan in 2021, I think. On the margins, there was actually a discussion between President Biden and our Prime Minister, which took this process of defense cooperation forward. And the ICET and the aircraft engines deal have emerged from this. The DTTI, we had our 10th session in 2021. And after that, as I said, with the Quad meeting, these new initiatives have emerged. We will know once the actual details are out, but let me add 2 points. The ICET goes far beyond defense. It's strategic in its purest sense. It is globally relevant and it builds what I call this geo-economic partnership as much as defense. It is, first of all, defense manufacturing and transfer of technology, but it includes advanced computing and artificial intelligence. It includes green technologies and the energy transition. It includes space applications. And I'm told it's even got scope for joint work on things like vaccines. So, it's a very, very highly important initiative. The second thing I see in this meeting is that matters have not been left to the two sides' bureaucracies only. The leaders on both sides have taken a high degree of what is called ownership to drive the agenda. That is why Mr. Jake Sullivan came here and met Mr. Doval. Mr. P.K. Mishra, the principal secretary to RPM, went to the US and talked to Jeff Zients, who is the chief of staff of Mr. Biden. So these are the kind of initiatives which show that the leaders are saying, yes, we want this to happen. And I think that is what is driving the biggest factor of change, along with what I described earlier.
Yes, sir. So do you think this visit will be a crucial step in defense and the crucial technology sector cooperation?
Yes, I think it will. We will know in 2 days just how much of what the preparatory work has achieved and what has finally been signed. Sometimes there are still gaps. It's possible we'll be left with some, but even if we get 80%, 90% of what information has been leaked, and I think it has been deliberately leaked to create this buzz around the visit, it's a huge achievement, and I think it will drive an entirely new relationship between India and the United States.
Thank you, sir. So as we come to an end of this session, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to sir for sharing his profound insights on the India-US strategic partnership. So through this discussion, we have gained a deeper understanding of the convergences, interests, and challenges that defines this crucial relationship. Mr. Ranjan Mathai?
Can I just come in? I'd like
Yes.
to conclude without limiting ourselves to only what the two of us are doing, because as any practitioner of diplomacy will tell you, these are never in isolation.
Yes.
And how other actors are reacting to you or playing the game is important. And I would like to refer very briefly again to China, because that is really the elephant in the room, or the big factor which is driving the mutuality of interests for both of us. And we've just had a visit by the US Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, to China. And I would always say that as somebody who's looked at this as a long game, looked at it historically, you must remember that for the United States, its most important relationship, whether it's a bad relationship or a good relationship, the most important, the most significant relationship is managing its relationship with China. That is not going to change. Earlier, during the Cold War, it was its relationship with the USSR. Now, both sides are seeking stabilization, and that's similar to what happened in the Cold War. And remember, the US has countervailing forces within its own economy, within its own politics, which, for example, Wall Street, its business lobbies, they have not given up on China, and they still feel that there is a huge opportunity for China. So this is one thing which is not going to go away. After all, we're talking about trade, hoping that it will reach 500 billion at the end of the decade. US-China trade is 700 billion already. And if things go on, it'll probably cross $1 trillion. I don't know, because things are slowing down. But it is clear that strategic competition between the two is here to stay. But the caveat I'm putting is that look back at the Cold War. The United States had the kind of very close, critical relationships with its NATO allies and with Japan. And yet, at the same time, its most important relationship was managing USSR. And there were occasions when it acted without even consulting its allies to stabilize that relationship. So that is a fact of life which we will have to get used to. That the United States-China relationship may see its ups, may see its downs. For India, the most important thing is what is the best way to make use of the opportunity that has opened in front of us and drive our economic transformation. The United States is probably the single country which has the capital, the depth of capital markets, the technology, the ability to adapt, which can help India transform itself from a developing country to an advanced, developed economy for the future.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that's the right statement to conclude this whole session. You actually shared a lot of insights into growing momentum surrounding the Prime Minister's visit to the US and how this will be, a milestone in advancing cooperation, especially in the critical technology, defense, industrial cooperation. So I think the foundations have been laid over the past decade to position India and the US to extend their relationship into newer domains, aiming for greater cooperation and mutual benefits. So at the same time, we are acknowledging the persistent differences that exist between the two nations, and the differences in approach to the Russia-Ukraine war, containing Chinese influence in the Pacific region, and all those things. But the need for India's support in collective defense against Chinese aggression, while safeguarding its own security interest, its strategic autonomy, remains an important consideration as well. So I think this is a very important discussion at this point to analyze how India-US relations have emerged. So we have to address the certain challenges that's being faced in previous initiatives and setting realistic expectations as the way forward. So both countries can strive towards a successful outcome that strengthens their collaboration in these vital areas of cooperation. So I think this session has provided us with valuable insights into the contemporary drivers of the India-US relationship the achieved level of defense and technology cooperation, and the factors that set the stage for taking this partnership to the next level, as we have discussed. So it's clear that strategic convergence, economic cooperation, and mutual dependence are key factors that will push this relationship forward. So once again, thank you so much, sir, for this invaluable contribution to this dialogue, enlightening with your expertise and analysis. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for listening. Please follow CPPR website and social media for further insightful discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you and to share some thoughts from my own experience.
Thank you so much, sir. We look forward to continue engaging with you in the future.